South of the Algerian oasis belt, the sand can pass 70 degrees Celsius by early afternoon. And onto that sand, a team unloads crate after crate from a refrigerated truck and starts prying the lids open. Not equipment, not water, insects. Millions of them, chilled, nearly motionless for weeks, waking up in the driest place on Earth. Then everyone drove away and left them there for a full year. It sounds made up. And that turns out to be the most interesting thing about it, because the question underneath the story is real. Across North Africa, people have genuinely been asking whether pollinators could hold a dying oasis together. Not green the whole desert, just stop what's left from vanishing. But a honeybee colony begins failing above roughly 40 degrees, and Saharan afternoons sit closer to 50. So why does this story keep getting told? I'm Ambrose Wild, and I went looking for the study behind it. What I found instead was better. Start with the crates. Every version of this story opens the same way. Millions of bees, frozen solid, released into the Sahara in 2023, abandoned for 12 months. Some versions say 3 million. Some say the desert bloomed. Some say the colonies cooked at 70 degrees and the whole thing failed. What none of them say is who ran it. No university, no funding body, no published paper, no named researcher, no monitoring data, no photographs of the release. Trace any version back far enough and it ends in another video with the same thumbnail, or an article that reads like it was assembled rather than written. The story has a plot and no origin. Therefore, the honest place to begin isn't what happened to those bees, it's why a story with no source travels this well. There's a tell once you know to look for it. A real experiment leaves a paper trail before it leaves a headline. A permit, an institution, a principal investigator, a set of coordinates. This one arrives fully formed, always with a round number of bees, always with a year that has conveniently just elapsed, and never with a person you could email. The specifics are all in the parts that make you feel something, and absent from every part you could check. And it travels because it flatters an assumption nearly everyone holds, that a dead landscape is a broken landscape, and a broken landscape can be repaired by putting life back into it. Ship in the pollinators, wait a year, watch the sand turn green. It's a satisfying shape. It's also the exact shape of the last 40 years of desert restoration failure. Which is where the real material starts, because the actual science around Saharan pollinators is stranger than the invented version, and the actual attempt to green the southern edge of this desert produced a result nobody would have scripted. Start with the animal itself. The story always uses honeybees, because honeybees are what we picture when someone says bee. Wooden hive boxes stacked in a field, a beekeeper in white, frames heavy with comb. But the Western honeybee is livestock. It's a managed, transported, medicated agricultural animal, bred for output the way dairy cattle are bred for milk. Releasing honeybee colonies into the Sahara to rescue it makes roughly as much ecological sense as releasing Holsteins into the Serengeti and calling it rewilding. The desert already has bees. They just don't look like the ones on the jar. North Africa's real pollinators are overwhelmingly solitary. A single female digs a nest tunnel into sun-baked ground, provisions a handful of cells with pollen, seals them, and dies before her offspring ever emerge. No hive, no shared nest, no colony to overheat. And that last detail is the whole point, because a solitary ground-nesting bee never has to cool a communal nest through a 50-degree afternoon. That is precisely the constraint that would kill an imported colony, and desert bees simply don't have it. Many of them also solve the heat the way almost everything else out there solves it, by refusing to meet it. They fly at first light, stop as the sun climbs, and come back out as the ground surrenders its heat in the evening. That's not an unusual strategy in a desert, it's the only strategy. The fennec fox hunts after dark. The scorpion spends the day buried under the sand it hunts on. Nothing that survives out there tries to outlast the afternoon. It schedules around it. And the plants have arrived at the same answer independently, with some arid zone flowers holding their pollen late and pushing scent into the cooler air, advertising to whatever is still flying. Which raises an uncomfortable possibility about our own data. We have studied deserts for decades with cameras, traps and survey teams, and we have run most of that work in daylight, because that is when people prefer to be outdoors in a place that can cook them. If a meaningful share of desert pollination happens in the dark, we have been counting the quiet shift and calling it the whole workforce. And our knowledge of these animals is thinner than almost anyone assumes. A 3-year survey across Morocco, running from 2022 to 2024, documented 245 bee species. In the southern desert regions, the share that were new regional records ran between 67 and 86%. Read that again. In the driest parts of the country, most of what the researchers found had never been formally recorded as living there. Therefore, the premise collapses twice over. We wouldn't need to import pollinators into the Sahara. It has its own, adapted over millions of years to a problem honeybees have no answer for. And we couldn't measure whether an introduction worked anyway, because there is no baseline inventory to measure against. But if the Sahara story is invented, the fear driving it is not. Between April 2024 and April 2025, beekeepers across the United States lost an estimated 55.6% of their managed colonies. That is the highest annual loss recorded since national tracking began in 2010, and the second consecutive record-breaking year. Winter losses alone hit 40.2%. A separate survey aimed at commercial operations put their figure near 62%, more than 1 million hives gone in 9 months, right as those colonies were being trucked towards the California almond orchards that depend on them. The most frequently cited cause wasn't heat. It was a parasite about the size of a pinhead. Varroa destructor latches onto a bee, feeds on it, and moves viruses through the colony while it does. Most commercial hives now cannot survive an infestation without chemical intervention on a schedule. Take the beekeeper out of the system, and the season takes the hive. And this is where the optimization problem becomes real rather than metaphorical. We selected honeybees for docility, honey yield, and manageability at industrial scale. We got exactly that, and an animal that requires permanent human life support. Meanwhile, several African honeybee populations, considerably harder to work with and far less managed, show meaningful Varroa resistance with no treatment regime at all. Not immunity, resilience. The difference matters, and it cost something we traded away deliberately, one breeding decision at a time. So the anxiety underneath the frozen bee story is well founded. The story simply points it at the wrong desert and at the wrong bee. Which brings us to what actually works on this landscape, and it isn't biology. In 2007, the African Union launched the Great Green Wall, a planned belt of trees running roughly 8,000 kilometers across the width of the continent, intended to stop the Sahara pushing south. A literal wall of forest. The most photogenic restoration concept of the century. It underperformed badly. Seedlings went into ground that had crusted hard enough to shed rainwater rather than absorb it, and large proportions of them died within a season or two. Therefore, the project quietly became something else. Not a wall, a mosaic of local land management, stitched together village by village. And the technique that carried it wasn't new. It was old enough to have been forgotten. Farmers in Burkina Faso and Niger revived zai, small pits roughly 15 to 50 centimeters across, punched into hardpan and packed with manure. Alongside them, demi-lunes, crescent-shaped earth buns cut into a slope with the open side facing uphill. A farmer and agronomist named Yakuba Sawadogo drove the method back into practice in the 1980s, filling his pits with compost to rebuild the soil from the inside out, while his neighbours told him it was a waste of a season. Neither technique adds life to the landscape. Both do exactly one thing. They stop water from leaving. Rain in the Sahel arrives fast and runs off faster across compacted ground, sheeting away before anything can drink. A half-moon bund catches that runoff, holds it in place and gives it time to sink. Somewhere between 10 and 15% goes down to recharge the water table instead of vanishing downslope. And inside the pit, sheltered by the shade of its own rim, a seedling gets a microclimate the open sand cannot offer it. The FAO has since deployed mechanized Delfino plows across Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigeria and Senegal, cutting half-moons at roughly 10 times the rate of digging by hand. In Burkina Faso and Niger, restoration targets were reached and then extended. Crescent-shaped scars in the dirt. That's the intervention that worked. Not shipped-in pollinators, geometry. So the honest answer to the headline is that nobody dropped millions of frozen bees into the Sahara, and had they done it, it would not have worked. But there is a real number attached to this desert that is genuinely hard to believe, and almost nobody repeating the bee story has ever heard it. Every year, wind lifts around 182 million tons of dust off the Sahara and carries it west past the African coast. Roughly 132 million tons are still airborne as the plume nears South America. About 27.7 million tons of it comes down over the Amazon basin. Inside that dust is phosphorus, around 22,000 tons of it annually. NASA's Calypso satellite measured the plume in 3 dimensions between 2007 and 2013, and a team led by Hongbin Yu published the figures in 2015. The finding that matters isn't the size of the dust cloud, it's what 22,000 tons corresponds to. It is approximately the quantity of phosphorus the Amazon loses each year to heavy rain and runoff. And most of that dust originates in a single location, the Bodele Depression in Chad, the dried bed of an ancient lake, its sediment made largely of fossilized freshwater plankton. So the most biologically productive forest on the planet is running a roughly balanced nutrient account, and that balance is being closed from 5,000 kilometers away by the slow erosion of the emptiest place we know of. The desert that looks most dead is feeding the forest that looks most alive. And once you've seen that, the frozen bee story reads differently. It isn't really a lie about bees, it's a symptom of a habit, judging a landscape by how closely it resembles somewhere we already approve of, then assuming anything that fails the test must be broken and waiting on us to arrive with crates. The Sahara was never waiting. It has a function. It has been performing it the entire time, several thousand kilometers downwind, where nobody thought to look. Which leaves a better question than the headline asked. Not how do we fix this place, but what is it already doing that we haven't measured yet? That question has a great many answers, and most of them are buried in exactly the kind of place people write off as empty. I'm Ambrose Wild, and digging them out is what this channel does. Real numbers traced to real sources about the parts of this planet everyone has already dismissed. Stay with me, because the next one is stranger than this.